On air, online, on campus.
Exeter. This is Expression FM.
All right, hello and welcome back to this surprise bonus episode of External Affairs. I know we said we would sign off for the year, but, fate has other plans. Welcome, Kornelia Stark. Do you just want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hi everyone, I'm Kornelia. I'm from Poland and I'm a third-year student at University of Exeter studying psychology. And I came here today to talk to you about a little bit about the Polish politics. Awesome.
That's brilliant. So we'll get right into that. My first question is a sort of a broader question. So can you provide, an overview in terms of your opinion of the current state of the EU's foreign policy as a whole, because Poland is part of the EU, and some of its major challenges?
You see, what I think currently is a big sort of issue that we're having is the divide between the views of the immigration policies due to different conflicts around the world, and some. I'd say some countries are much more open to let the immigrants and get settled in their countries, whereas others have a bit more of strict policies. So, for example, with the Ukrainian conflict, Poland has been much more open to let people live in our country, but especially in some others, it's a bit more of a challenge. And then there's other issues, I'd say, of let's say the beliefs in general regarding women's rights, the church itself, and what people should be doing in their everyday lives. At least that's what I think.
Yeah, certainly. With the European Parliament heading, very, very right wing, how do you think that might affect the EU as a bloc, as a whole?
You see, I perceive this a little bit concerning because I feel like this is going a bit backwards in the views that we're currently having. We're going back to being influenced by the religion. We're going back to being closed off to new opportunities, new perspectives and new beliefs. We're closing ourselves off on the progress of people at work and in general opportunities, and we're closing ourselves off on women's rights and just giving opportunities for them to fight for their equality. So seeing the results, I've been really concerned about where are we going in the future, but I hope it's not going to be a big change from now on.
So where do you think this might go in terms of a worst case scenario, best case scenario? What? You
see, I think, and I really hope that's not going to be the case, that we're just, I think the issue is the younger people start having more extreme views from now on, and that especially because of the stuff that's happening around the world. So because of that, we are closing ourselves off in general when it comes to letting international people travel around the world, immigrants, and as I said, opportunities and everything. So I think everything might become much stricter than it was before, and much less open to allowing being different, having a different opinion, choosing own decision, having own rights.
Yeah, for sure. Why do you mentioned young people having more extreme views? I think that's objective fact at this point, but why do you think that is in terms of young people having these more extreme views?
You see, I would say a considerable role that is played here is the social media and media in general, because nowadays, especially when it comes to social media, we're getting lots of different perspectives, which would not necessarily be available 30 years ago, let's say. 30 years ago, you would speak to your friends, you would get influence about what they think, maybe listen to the TV. Right now, you can basically search whatever you think suits your points of views. You could get influenced by popular people, famous people, what they think. And then also there is a lot of more theories available for you to read about. So it's much more easier to get influenced by everything that's out there, because you can tailor your opinion, and then the social media just kind of gives the information you want to see. It's kind of a confirmation bias. You're just seeing what you believe in. And that's kind of strengthening the views. And that's also a bit the fact of what's happening currently in the world. We've seen loads of, the conflicts are still happening. We've seen attacks happening, and that sort of people are more likely to make generalizations and shift their views towards being more right-wing extremist and stuff like that.
Interesting. Well, you study psychology. I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a kind of psychological element to this and to social media and the way it works, especially in politics and the foreign affairs realm?
Oh yeah, definitely. As I mentioned before, if you have a specific opinion about a topic, you're more likely, for example, to watch a video that supports your view, to like learn more about it, or you feel more outraged when you see a video that does not support your views. So, for example, you scroll much faster. Sometimes even like the phone, the social media knows your political preferences, and that's why you're more likely to just receive the information that is tailored to your beliefs already, because you're more likely to stay on that page, read more, and psychologically speaking, that kind of feeds into your ideas and supports your points of views. So you're more likely to continue finding out more about it. And so, for example, that is also the case, let's say, with your political view. Let's say if you are more on the right side, or if you're more on the left side, and you'll be reading news when it's like a presidential election or a governmental election, you're more likely to see news that support your point of view, because that makes you much more likely to vote for that party. And we've seen that, for example, with the elections in the United States, where the right-wing people voting for Trump would get information that supports their point of view. And similarly for people that voted for Biden. And it's a very fun thing to like even see, is that basically if you would take a phone of someone from the right wing and scroll through their social media feed, you would be so surprised about everything that they see, but they would consider it normal because it's so like tailored towards you.
Yeah, for sure. Staying on the USA, actually, my next question is on USA Polish elections. Now, recently, Donald Tusk's party have come back to power, unseating the PIS. Is there any effect on that in terms of Polish-USA relations? What's the kind of, where are we going from here? What's the landscape looking like?
I'd say the Polish American friendship is still doing pretty well, simply because we've got Andrzej Duda, who's our president, being in charge, and he has very good relations. He had, for example, with Trump. I've seen him with Biden as well. So we've been supporting each other for a very long time, since basically communism has ended. And because of that, we allow, for example, American soldiers to come to Poland as a part of the NATO and have their bases trained for any situations that could happen, and is like a mutual support. So, for example, recently, a couple years ago, we stopped needing to have a visa to come to the United States because of the friendship, the trust going in between us. So I think depends, for example, what happens with the change with the presidential elections in America, but I think the situation should roughly remain the same unless there is some radical movements going on from the Polish side, but I think that it might be unlikely because ultimately the primary contact is between the president of Poland and the president of the United States, which are both quite good friends, I'd say.
Yeah, interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Duda is a PIS supporter, or at least influenced by the PIS, maybe an appointee?
Yeah, he is. He is very. I would say, from my perspective, he is very heavily influenced by the Law and Justice Party. Basically, sometimes people even joke about it, but I think there might be a bit of truth in it. He is kind of a puppet of Jarosław Kaczynski, who is basically the leader of Law and Justice. So if something is, let's say, for example, with the current government, because the previous opposition is now in charge, if they want to pass a reform or any new law that they decided on, the president is much more likely now to veto it, simply because it's going against the party that he supports.
Do you think, in terms of a broader foreign policy context, this will have its implications?
I think, well, to some extent, yes, simply because the current parties in charge are really working towards kind of helping Poland to move forwards and open itself up, because ultimately we are still a very conservative country, reliant on the religion, and kind of with, well, obviously we are moving forward, we are getting more developed and stuff, but the beliefs, especially of older people, are staying the same. And the current government is trying its hardest to, for example, reform education, which has moved backwards while being under Law and Justice. Is trying to move as I mentioned before, the women's rights movement, give women more opportunities to make their own choices. So I'd say Duda definitely creates a problem for the whole Polish government, because we are trying to move forward and kind of keep up with the rest of Europe and their beliefs, whereas he is blocking all the opportunities to do so.
Do you think that, in terms of looking at this in terms of maybe NATO, do you think that Duda might harm Poland's commitments to NATO in terms of, do you think there might be? Is he really that big of an obstruction where he might, just stop major foreign policy?
I would say I don't think he is as much of an issue with the NATO, simply because he's been on the side of supporting military and Polish defense. He is very he's put money recently into defense, and that's one of his priorities. So I think he is maintaining the good relationships with NATO. I think it's more of an issue of the society and how our views and opportunities that there are available for Polish people. But in case of defense and when it comes to NATO, I think that should not be as much of an issue, because, well, women's rights or education is not much of an issue to NATO at the moment, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. Staying with NATO, what do you think NATO can do in terms of playing a role with regards to Eastern European countries like Poland?
I think, well, for us being in NATO for now 25 years, it is a very big deal, simply because we are very, very close to the Russian side, which has always been a risk, because we are one of the first Eastern Bloc countries that started to basically change our policies and divert from the ideas of the Russian state. And especially being in NATO is very important in current days when we have Ukrainian war going on just right next to us, which definitely, well, it prevents Putin to move forwards and try to conquer, let's say, other Eastern European countries, simply because we have the support of the NATO and America, which, well, that's why he avoids Poland so much. And we've even had instances where there has been, I think, 2 years ago, 2 bombs accidentally landed in Poland and killed 2 people, and NATO was already in action. America was ready to start moving forwards. It turned out to be Ukrainian bombs that ended up there by accident, but there is the mobilization of all of our support. So I think Putin, that basically shows that Russia wouldn't make a move towards Poland and Eastern European countries if they belong to NATO, because we have the bigger support on this side.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We'll circle back to Russia and more specifically communism after the break. But before we do have our first song break of the show, I want to ask in terms of what can NATO do, what can Poland do to obviously stay on the kind of Western side and not get drawn in back to the allure of Russia?
I'd say definitely trying to maintain good relations between the Poland and Western countries, being in agreement and exchanging resources that we have, but also just making sure that Poland could be to some extent considered like a border between the Russian influence and the Western side, simply because we've got Ukraine, we've got Belarus bordering us. So these two countries are heavily, Ukraine is under a war, but Belarus is heavily influenced by Russia. So we kind of are currently the bridge that is supporting the situation of NATO and in general the Western side of the world, in just trying to maintain good situation and prevent any conflicts.
Yeah, for sure. Well, more with Cordelia after the break on Polish foreign policy. It's been a fascinating discussion so far, but for now, let's give our voices a break and have a song break. Welcome back to External Affairs on Expression FM. So that first part was all about USA Poland and the overall policy of Poland in regards to foreign affairs. Now we want to take a historical deep dive. So, Cornelia, what do you think is the impact of the historical communist regime on, just give an overview of the communist regime and how that worked and what the impact might be?
Basically, I'd say the communism regime had a very considerable impact on Poland in general and how it looks like even today. Poland used to be the part of the Eastern Bloc controlled by the Soviet Union since basically the end of World War II. And because of that, our government also had a different structure. So back then, currently it's a president, we've got a prime minister, and then we have the opposition and the other side of the party in rule, basically. Back then, it used to be just a prime minister and then the party. There was barely any real opposition, simply because everything was controlled by Soviet Union, so it had to be in their favor, whatever was happening. And so the leader of the whole country was in fact like the leader in Soviet Union, and they just had a representative that was the prime minister of Poland. Basically, when it comes to communism, it was a very tough time in Poland, because that meant we were closed off to the rest of the world, and we didn't receive the same amount of opportunities as other countries would. For example, because of the Eastern Bloc, we had considerable difficulties rebuilding ourselves after World War II. Other countries received financial support to recover, whereas we were blocked by being a part of the Soviet Union, because the United States would not give us money because of that. And so life under communism was tougher because of lack of resources, lack of food, lack of opportunities. And that meant, for example, there has been this ration system introduced in Poland, which was prominent for like 20-30 years, where you would get a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper you would have the amount of different foods you could get. So let's say you could get this amount of grams of meat, and because of that you couldn't get any more, you had to use this paper. And in case of the government, it was very one-sided. Everything was basically supporting the Soviet Union. There was not much of a freedom of a speech, no opposition. If you were talking anything against Soviet Union, you were very likely to end up in prison, or just have considerable consequences on your family and on your close relatives. So basically, you just had to follow what was happening back then, and agree with this current situation. And you could even see that through different instances where the situation would become so bad, people would start rioting and striking against the current the situation that was then, and the government in charge. And even that, to some extent, would not be successful, simply because the government, the military, would suppress everything that was happening, and it wouldn't be just simply, police coming and ending everything. It would be bloody riots, military basically shooting people, and a lot of people got harmed during that time. So, well, it wasn't really colorful, I would describe it that way.
Yeah, colourful is certainly an apt description. You mentioned quite a lot of economic impacts there. Are there any places where, communist rule can still be felt in current day Poland, maybe in the economic impacts there? Or is it largely subsided?
Yeah, I feel definitely we still kind of, you can still notice that Poland is pretty much a bit behind other countries, and that could be observed up until we joined the EU at the beginning of 2000s, because before that, simply we would have to rely on the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union wouldn't give us as much as we wanted, so the salaries were not enough, we wouldn't get import would be very poor, we wouldn't get loans that we wanted, so people had to survive on very little that was available, and that would lead to situations like inflation, hyperinflation even. The pay of the people was not enough then, and currently you can even notice it. I had an opportunity to work in Poland during summer once in a job that was quite difficult and one of the toughest one I've experienced, and I would get paid for it £5 per hour, compared to the jobs I've had here where it's not even as hard as the one I did in Poland, where I get twice the amount. So, and even you can see people from different countries around the world coming to Poland and being astonished by how cheap some of the items are. So it is a bit of a struggle, for example, if you want to move abroad, because everything is just considerably more expensive to you.
Is the cost of living in Poland, though, cheaper, or is the cost of living as expensive but the wages are lower?
I'd say the cost of living is not as bad, let's say, as in the UK in comparison. We don't face as many issues when it comes to bills and stuff like that, simply because we have more like the EU resources available to us. But still, the housing crisis is still very prominent. It's very hard to find a good place to live for a reasonable amount of money. So you can see, for example, loads of Polish people, young people, being less likely to move out of their family houses simply because it's too expensive to sustain themselves. And so I think that age when you start living by yourself has moved even to up to 27, 28 because of this situation. And that's why, for example, we also, when it comes to holidays, the holidays are usually, and it's a bit of a funny thing, we drive when we go on holidays the majority of the time. So let's say Croatia is a very popular destination, but Polish people don't fly to any Croatian destinations, they drive there. Simply because it is very expensive for us to go on holidays and travel abroad. And there is, well, obviously Poland is opening up to foreign companies, and because of that the pay is increasing and everything, but it's still not comparable to the rest of the world and the West in particular.
Yeah, that's fascinating in terms of the economic impacts. Do you think that the communist regime has any impact on foreign policy and international relations today? Or
Yeah, well, definitely. Communism in general had a considerable impact on how people think and what they do. So the politicians that are in charge today, all of them lived during the communism regime, which means a lot of perspectives and beliefs they have are still very similar to the ones that communist people had, and that's why they even the recent changes by Law and Justice when he was still in power were all kind of circling back to the communism ones. Like, we had different school systems for 20 years, and then suddenly Law and Justice decided, you know what? The school system in communism was actually better. Let's just suddenly switch it for no reason.
Yeah.
So they still hold those beliefs, and especially, well, communism is not as much the religion part is also very significant bit affecting in general the politics, and in communism it still was very a big part when it comes to like the politicians and how they organized even like riots and strikes. It was all like connected with religion in general.
Yeah, do you think the church and the state, because you've mentioned religion quite a few times over the course of the show, do you think the church and state are intertwined or they're separated?
Well, officially they are separated, but there is a lot of instances you can see where they aren't entwined. We have, for example, bishops that unfortunately got money from the government to support them simply because they support the same political views as the Law and Justice Party in general. Law and Justice as a party is very connected with the church simply because it holds the same values. All of the people in the Law and Justice Party have very conservative religion-related ideas, and for example, because of that, they are strongly against abortion and any form of contraception for women because it goes against religion and the beliefs of the Catholic Church. And that's why, for example, holidays, the Christmas, Easter are very important for the party itself, and that's why they prioritize like having free time and time around it. And so you can even see recently there has been an instant, and even Elon Musk commented on this situation. We have the president of Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski. He is the part of the opposition, the Civic Coalition. And in his office, he basically announced that he's banning any sort of religious symbols in the building. Right. Obviously, you are allowed to wear like jewelry representing your religion, but basically everywhere in Poland, if you go to a shop, if you go to a school, everywhere you can see a cross, something religion related. And he is the first person to make the decision to ban everything, and he faced very big backlash because of it, because obviously the rest of the society is deeply religious, and it just seems outrageous to make a decision like that.
Would I be right in saying it's Orthodox Christianity in terms of, you know, what's the kind of religion that's dominant in Poland?
It's Catholicism.
Catholicism, right?
It's not necessarily Orthodox, because Orthodox is like Ukrainians and more towards the east, but it's still like the Catholic religion is very deeply rooted within each family, and you can see there is still very high presence of people in churches and celebrating different holidays. Even both of my grandmas attend church every Sunday.
Wow.
So it is a very, very big part. Maybe a bit less in the West. It's becoming less in the West simply because the West is a bit more on the educated side, industrialized side, and we are trying to have the more modern approach. But when it comes to the East, it's really Catholic, really conservative, and in general just people have very religious beliefs, and you can see that in general when it comes to, like, let's say, the attendance in church and stuff like that.
Yeah, certainly. Speaking of, you know, partitions and East and West, how do you think that the considerable divides because of the historic partitions? What impact does it have on today's foreign policy?
Well, basically, to give a little bit of context, the partitions that happened, well, a long time ago, they were between Prussia, Russia back then, and Austria, and that meant they took parts of Poland piece by piece, and then there was no Poland for over 100 years, and we only came back in 1918. And since that time, you can still see a very considerable division between the East and West, simply because Prussia was invested much more in the western side of Poland. So you can see it by the educational system, the railways, the industrialization of that side of the country, whereas Russia and later Soviet Union did not invest as much into that side of Poland. They basically just enforced rules trying to turn that side of Poland into Russia at that moment. We had this on both sides, bit more on the Russian side than the Prussian one. There was this thing called Russification, where everything you would do you were trying to turn all the Polish people into Russians, which at the end of the day did not work.
I think it's interesting. They're trying the Russification word especially has been bandied around in relation to Ukraine and Georgia and Crimea especially. That is interesting. In what impact has that had on the national identity of Poland then? What is it to be Polish? Is there do Polish people from the West feel dramatically different to Polish people from the East?
You see, I think at the end of the day, it's looking back at those times, it still makes you very proud that we managed to maintain that Polish identity, and we even were taught about it in school in general, about the underground systems, the governmental systems, the education we all received during that times when Poland did not exist, because in fact 100 years passed back then, and we still remained as a country with all the values, the language and everything. But when it comes today, you can see a very considerable division between East and West. And that's because of, for example, the voting preferences. And as I mentioned before, also when it comes to religion, the eastern side of Poland is much less industrialized. It's mainly farms and people just not even going to work in companies or anything like that. It's just small areas. Also, as I mentioned, less industrialization there. And because of all of that, they have less education and they don't have as much of an awareness when it comes to what happens in politics. And because of that, they are much more easily swayed when it comes to financial situations. So, for example, a lot of people were swayed to vote for the Law and Justice Party when they introduced this thing called 500 plus, which basically means that if you have more than one child in a family, you get 500 zlotys. I think it's higher now, but it used to be 500 zlotys every month to support you having that child. And because of the financial incentives that people get, and in general just support that they received, which did not necessarily mean that the government is good, because it was still making bad decisions, they were swayed to vote for that party because of the benefits that they were receiving. And so you can still, there is loads of really fun maps showing the division that still exists today. Even when you can see it when it comes to voting, you can actually even see it when it comes to having a toilet inside your house.
Wow.
The West majority of houses has a toilet inside, obviously. The East, not necessarily. So there is a lot of maps showing that.
For sure. And I think in terms of keeping that national identity together, maybe that's something for, Ukraine, other embattled regions to maybe learn from. That's really fascinating. Well, we'll take a break now, but after the break, we'll return to, the solidarity movement. I know you wanted to cover that, and sort of look out towards the future in terms of foreign policy in Poland and the alignment. But for now, here's another song. Welcome back to External Affairs on Expression FM for the final part of the actual final show of the year. Matthewson has joined us in the studio.
Yes, I heard some of the discussion before I joined, before the break. Very fascinating. Looking forward towards the final 20 minutes.
Brilliant. So I know you wanted to cover the solidarity movement, Cornelia, so let's start jumping in with that. What do you think the legacy of the solidarity movement is, and how has it influenced contemporary social and political movements in Poland and beyond in terms of, looking externally?
Maybe I'll give a little bit of a background
when
it comes to the solidarity movement, because basically solidarity started at the end, like 1980s roughly, when the communist situation was not looking very good, simply because the workers were not receiving enough pay, and the prices of food were considerably rising, and there was just general unhappiness among the society regarding this situation. And so people started striking, and that all started in Gdańsk, which is a northern city in Poland. And they just started organizing very big strikes where they just wouldn't work. And that spread throughout the whole Poland, all the factories, mines, anything related to the country itself that would give money to the country, they just all stopped working. And after all, they created this work union, which later was called Solidarity. And obviously it was a bit of a not good situation when it comes to the Soviet Union, because obviously they wanted to have everything in control, but Poland was trying to make its own decision and try to change the course of history. And because of that, there was, for example, the martial law coming in place in 1980s, where they basically enforced very strict rules that you couldn't get outside of the house between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., all as an attempt to suppress the unhappiness, the strikes, the riots between different people. And they even arrested all of the leaders of the Solidarity, but then they had to release them because the resentment among people just kept continuing. And the relation between, for example, the U.S. stopped supporting Poland in general. There has been the speech of Ronald Reagan when he said, we're not going to allow any loans to Poland, we're blocking the airspace, loads of different repressions. And so obviously we couldn't survive simply on the Soviet Union, so eventually Solidarity was allowed to exist, and they even entered the election at the end of the 1980s. And well, the party in charge back then thought that they wouldn't get as much support, but it ended up being they got the majority. It was even the whole Senate was just Solidarity. There was no communist people in the party. Then Lech Wałęsa, who in 1984 received the Peace Award, the Nobel Peace Award, he became the president. And so the Solidarity is a very fascinating example where the left and the right came together to work against the communism regime and the situation that was happening, which currently would sort of be unimaginable. I don't see opportunity ever for them to come together, so that they started working together and they achieved the goal to help people, the workers that were in this terrible situation of not receiving enough money to sustain their families, their children, and get enough food. And so it is still a very considerable representation, and Polish people still remember it very well. And up to this day, for example, Lech Wałęsa, he can be visible in many political events because he is just like the symbol of this whole movement and the situation in Poland. But obviously, I think younger people that were born after this time are starting to forget a little bit about everything that happened, or may not even be aware, because they don't teach as much of what happened anymore in schools. For example, I've learned about solidarity by myself. We were taught a little bit, very briefly, but it's not taught as much anymore. So the legacy for people that were there back then is still very strong, and it's a massive event. But young people currently, people that didn't live back then, it doesn't make as much of an impact anymore, I'd say.
That is absolutely fascinating, especially the bits on martial law. It feels like it could be an episode of its own, really. Maybe you'll have to come back in the future and talk about it. In terms of, solidarity and its impact today, looking ahead in the future, what today could impact the foreign policy priorities of Poland and the whole of Europe going beyond into the future? And how do they align with the interests of the EU and NATO? And what's the future roadmap for Poland like, in your opinion?
You see, up until the elections that happened in November last year, where law and justice were still in charge, I wasn't very optimistic about everything that would happen in the future, simply because law and justice was making very conservative moves and changing the policies, which were just leading our country to go backwards. That's how I would describe it. Religion, for example, is still a very important topic in schools, but it doesn't really teach anything anymore. And it's just the priorities of the law and justice back then were very concerning. For example, one of the reforms they were discussing was banning Halloween.
Wow.
Which,
Wow.
well, because it goes against the idea of Catholicism. Halloween does not exist in Catholic religion.
I mean, St. Hallows, the Eve.
Yeah, but Halloween became more of a
more of a commercial holiday,
satanistic
Well,
idea.
you talk about Poland almost going backwards because of extreme conservatism. Could you draw any parallels to the Republicans in the United States, or just
there is a couple similarities in general. The people that kind of support the Law and Justice Party are very closed off in regards what's happening around the world, and they don't even, anything that you're going to tell them that does not support their point of view, they're just going to completely disregard it and stay within their own beliefs. And even this is even, you can see the lack of actual education in regards to the world in general. And I think you can see it a little bit with some of the Republicans as well, is that they will turn any information that comes their way to support the cause that they support in general. So, for example, I saw this interesting video where the Republicans supporting Trump were asked questions about Biden saying, "Oh, coronavirus does not exist," blah blah blah, and then they were like, "Oh yeah, this is terrible. This clearly shows how bad it is." But then the interviewer was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I meant Trump," and suddenly they would completely change and be like, "Well, but then this study showed this."
Yeah.
And a lot of Polish people are the same way. Even, for example, in the East, there have been instances of people being scared of 5G, wanting to completely ban the internet because they were concerned it was messing up with their brain chemistry or something.
Wow,
so you can see they are very closed off, and they just, religion and Catholicism particularly still has a very big influence on their beliefs and perspectives. So, for example, when it comes to LGBTQ, or when it comes to women's rights, or even immigrants coming in, they are all closed off on all of those ideas because they just look into religion as the main thing, and Poland being, this one agreed nation with no other different options available to them.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. I'm sure we could go on for another episode in a bit, but it is getting a little bit close to wrapping up.
Yeah.
So, as is tradition on this show,
Indeed it is.
Cornelia, what are your plans? What are you kind of doing next? You're kind of graduating this year. What are your plans? Where do you want to go?
So this year I am graduating with a psychology degree, hopefully, because the results are still not out, but I really hope that's going to be the case. And then I am moving back in the UK. I've been in the UK for 5 years now. And I think, well, this time is coming to an end. I hope maybe I can return for a while in the near future.
Yeah, come back and see us.
Absolutely. No, I definitely plan to come back to Exeter. But I am starting my next degree, master's degree, in digital media and society in Uppsala in Sweden, where I am hoping to stay for a bit longer because I don't know why, but Sweden's I feel like this is the place where I want to be. I want to learn the language and I want to just start living there, to be fair.
Wow, that's awesome.
So yeah, that's the main plan I am having right now, because the masters in Sweden are 2 years. It's not 1 year.
Oh wow.
Yeah, more
So,
substantial than 1 year.
Yes, I don't have particularly I'm not sure what's the career gonna be. I'm not set on anything. I am set on the area currently, and I just want to pursue that, education, and especially in the approach of the digital media and in general the media affecting our behavior and the society by itself. And then just see how it goes, to be fair.
Oh, well, from a media context, hopefully this will make for a good LinkedIn post then.
Maybe.
Speaking on external affairs.
Incredible. This whole conversation has been absolutely fascinating. Do come back. I'm sure we could have, episodes and episodes. Solidarity movement, digital media, I'm sure. But next up, we have the indomitable bass Chad Sigma, Lucas Lowe, with the last ever Lowe show of the year. Thank you so very much for listening to External Affairs. Thank you to Cornelia. Thank you to Matthewson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to Lucas as well for not getting angry that
we'll
we're going over. And we will see you, hopefully, ceteris paribus, next year.